So a dilemma facing industry at the moment is how do you reduce the negatives of plastic? So plastic in the environment is not something anyone wants, but how do you also at the same time not reduce food waste when plastic plays a key role in reducing food waste? It's estimated a third of all the food produced is not consumed. So an estimate, it's the crop area the size of China is sent to landfill or not consumed every year. So that's a key role of packaging, of how do you take produce from paddock to plate and minimise that loss. The barrier properties of plastic are superior to most other packaging forms in that it can act as a UV filter, it can act as a moisture barrier and an oxygen barrier. What that means in layman's terms is you have less food waste.
Barry, what tangible changes are we seeing?
Probably the biggest change I've seen in creating a circular economy, you need all sectors of the supply chain and all levels of government to come together with the joint aims. 5 years ago, there was probably a lot of conflict, not so much conflict anymore. Everyone is moving in the same direction and roles and responsibilities are emerging and policy levers are now becoming more certain. Packaging plays a really key role in Scope 3 emissions because when you go upstream and assessing your emissions, you need packaging to ship material and therefore you can reduce the waste of the material through the supply chain with good quality fit for purpose packaging.
And what is the AFGC doing to help in this area?
We've actually developed a roadmap for a circular economy in plastics because it's probably the greatest need. The role of the AFGC in this has been quite critical. We initiated the NPRS to address the soft plastics low recycling rate and low access to recycled content. On a daily or weekly basis, we're communicating with local councils, state governments, federal governments, departments, and really all sectors of the supply chain. And we've played a real key coordination role of bringing that all together because not one company alone or one state or one government alone can bring this to a conclusion.
It must be very difficult to bring together the various stakeholders, government, industry and consumers. Are they starting to move in the right direction?
The stakeholder management on this is massive because we're looking at a supply chain that's got about 8 different stages. We've got to invest in a couple of those to get the right infrastructure in place. So you've got the 8 sectors all coming together, and then on top of that you've got the 3 levels of government to all come together with a common plan to move forward and actually fill those gaps in the supply chain.
Barry, does it sometimes seem like herding cats?
Very much is herding cats, and rightly so. There's all these existing industries, they've all got their existing asset bases, so it's change, and change is hard.
So what is your advice to manufacturers in the food and grocery sector?
Manufacturers, if they really want to make a change, is make sure your packaging meets the global and local sustainability design guidelines. Specifically on soft plastics, we're working on the National Plastics Recycling Scheme, where we're looking to take soft plastics that is destined for landfill, get it into the curbside recycling bin. It's estimated there's close to 300,000 tonnes of soft plastics entering homes every year. So the proposal we have is that it's best to collect that through the curbside bin for the convenience factor for the community. And all we would need them to do is take the soft plastics, put it into a specially designed soft plastic bag that we would supply. That's all they need to do.
Are we moving quickly enough?
I think we could always move quicker, but we have to move and we have to move quickly. But we also got to bear in mind what are the perverse outcomes of some of the proposed actions. Quite often we hear ban plastics, and in some cases you can, and other cases that would have a perverse outcome on emissions, on Scope 3 and therefore on climate change. So we just got to act with a whole of life cycle approach.
So what's one tangible thing that industry can do?
If you're a brand and you're in soft plastics, we have a responsibility to make sure it's recyclable, but also that it is recycled. So if there's one ask, it would be support the process of the NPRS, the project, get on board with that, because together we can actually bring the whole industry together and create the change that's needed to make the product recyclable and to gain or increase the availability of food grade recycled content. There's a lot of opportunity there. There's 4 different consortiums who have proposals for a chemical or advanced recycling infrastructure. What they require is a couple of things. One is they need feedstock. So hence why in the NPRS we're looking at how much can you collect through the curbside bins, because they're not going to build without the feedstock. And they also need a mandatory product stewardship scheme so that everyone is funding to help fund the economic gap and the pre-processing of the material.
How important is it to get consumers on board?
To get to a circular economy, you really need 3 things. You need a whole-of-nation approach, you need a whole-of-life cycle approach, and you need a whole-of-system approach. So what you need is government to have the same standards across the country so your community can get on board and reduce the confusion. You need a whole-of-system approach so every sector in the supply chain knows its role and what it needs to do to act. And you've got to remember what's the emissions from cradle to grave, but not cradle to grave, right back through the economy again so you don't have perverse outcomes. The waste industry is going through a massive transformation because waste is now viewed as a resource and effectively becomes the input material and therefore moves to the beginning of the supply chain. Hence quality standards come into place, traceability comes into place, all those key enablers to make sure that you have a resource of high value that you can put food product into.